time is now 7 p.m. and I will call this regular meeting of the Plainfield Charter Revision Commission to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call. Matt Radance is present. Lynn Desjardins.
Present.
June Gagne.
Here.
Cheryl Hurley.
Present.
Mr. Lumpkins is absent. Dan Kapsikevich. Present. Colleen Legaskis.
Present.
Item C, review and accept minutes of the October 11th, 2023 special public hearing. Minutes have been distributed via email and are available on the town website. Hopefully everybody had a chance to review.
I make a motion to accept. I'll second that.
Motion has been made and seconded to accept the minutes. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Measure carries.
That one abstaining wasn't here.
Okay, one abstention from Colleen.
Thank you.
Item C, review and discuss action on suggested charter revisions. So part one, Board of Selectmen suggested charter revisions. As I hope everybody saw yesterday, the first selectman sent out two documents, a second sample mock-up of the ballot that has most of the questions that were part of the recommendations that the Board of Selectmen handed to the Charter Revision Commission. The only question I saw from the recommendations that was missing, that was also missing from the initial, was the town clerk and tax collector terms to align with Connecticut General Statutes 9-189A. That is the proposed revision that would align them to have their 4-year terms end after the new year, as opposed to right after the election date or the election time frame. So that is the one note I would like to make on that sample ballot as far as the listing of their questions. Also included from the first selectman in the communication yesterday was an initial draft version of the red line changes to the charter. Understanding that we have not had this red line version for very long, I don't expect that everybody has had a chance to completely and thoroughly review and read it.
The town clerk and the tax collector is written in red letter.
In the red line version, yes. Yep. So that change is noted in the red line draft. We can just, I guess, pencil it into the sample ballot listing here if we were using that as a reference
Can I
point.
just make one suggestion again, that the agriculture commission,
Agriculture.
not the
Agriculture.
agriculture.
Yep.
That would be a misprint.
And so in reviewing of the red line draft, and again, I want to stress that this is a draft version. This is not the final version of what changes could look like should questions be acted on and approved by the voters, but that it's meant to give you a good idea of how the language would change, what that change would look like. Obviously, we have still a handful of meetings left to go. We have another public hearing as well. So if we have questions either coming out of this meeting or upon further review over the coming days and weeks, I urge you to reach out to the first selectman, reach out to me, whatever we need to do to get a specific question asked, just to make sure that we're getting all the questions in there and we understand fully what these potential changes could look like as written. So, the first selectman is not at this meeting this evening, but that does not stop us from discussion of the suggestions. We did have a second public hearing a couple of weeks ago where some feedback was provided regarding a number of the questions that we see on the sample ballot here, as well as what you see highlighted in the red line version. So if there is any discussion at this time about those questions, please commence.
Okay, now, looking at the sample ballot, is the wording on this sample ballot, has it been reviewed by the lawyer, or?
So I do not believe, this is not the final draft of how the questions will be worded.
Okay.
That is to be provided to us prior to actioning them onto the final draft report that we will be voting on.
Because
Some of these questions still have some typos.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like question 10.
But the other thing is, wait, question 2. I don't know what that means, so I'm not sure that anybody else voting on it would know what it means.
So question 2 is listed for the audience's reference, is shall the capital improvement program be defined as such throughout the town charter? So that question actually stems from a lot of discussion from the previous meeting as well as our previous public hearing. In the red line draft, you will find that specifically, but not limited to section 10-5, there's a lot of different language that refers to the capital plan. It is referred to as a 5-year capital plan, capital improvement, capital program. That question is being sought to streamline and singularly define the reference point for
Needs
that.
to be reworded, I think, to be more clarified.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, and that's part of our feedback too, right? We need to make sure questions that are put onto the draft report are not only clear in their potential understanding, but also that they are clear in a yes or no answerable
Right.
format.
Right.
Right, the one other note I would add in there is if there is an additional consideration such as effective date, that be worked into the question as well. Any brief amount of clarity for action or effectiveness, I think, should be included. The one question that comes to mind on that is the tax due dates question,
Yeah.
where it could be affirmatively answered, yes, we'd like to change that. But in my opinion, it leaves open the door when that would actually be put into effect. You can change your charter to that, but when would it actually take effect?
In the year
I don't-
25.
Right, I can't answer as a lawyer, I'm not one. I don't know if there are other mechanisms that would answer that question for us, but in my opinion, if there are questions that might benefit from such clarity, from previous experience, when the charter question regarding adding a 7th member of the Board of Finance came about, there was some consternation after the fact about when that supposedly would take place. It was not working through the question at the time. Perhaps in hindsight, it could have been, but that.
So I think that's something critical.
Yeah, and I think some of this stuff is a little ambiguous if you're not familiar with the charter.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I would agree. My knowledge of the process, and previous members feel free to chime in from experience. I know that our leg of the process, and one of the reasons why we're working with draft versions of the red line
Right.
revisions, is so that we have those materials available to try to craft better questions and decide on the best suggestions to approve and put forward as recommendations. After our part of the process, for the Board of Selectmen, they do hold public hearings. And I believe that they, based on what First Selectman said at the previous public hearing, I believe that those red line edits, the potential changes, it is intended that those will be made available prior to the vote or the referendum for this. Beyond that, I believe that a voter would be able to go to the town clerk and receive a copy of the questions that are going to be on the ballot. I do not know if red line copies of what the changes look like will be available, but I agree that would be very beneficial. In previous charter revisions, I know that there have been videos with the town clerk attempting to explain some of the changes, or at least speaking to the importance of some of the questions and getting out and voting on them. So there are a number of methods outside of the ordinary process of the Charter Revision Commission that can certainly be engaged. As far as statutory limits, I don't believe that, I'm not sure that additional supplemental materials can be made available in the voter booth. For example, like, I don't know where the limit would be on reference material to bring with you when you go to vote, or if that can be afforded in an objective manner. But that would be a good
For a
question.
moderator, you're not allowed to bring educational or informational,
There we go.
unless the voter brings it in themselves. They can, if you had a sample ballot and you went in.
So based on that, I would assume that any voter information is going to be obtained either through reaching out to a member of the Charter Revision Commission, the town clerk, or a selectman,
I'm just thinking,
or their own homework.
people won't reach out. If we reach out and give it, it's supposed to, because, I don't see people going like to the town clerk to ask for it.
There's nothing stopping Kevin going up to the senior center and holding a meeting with the seniors to explain some of the changes that they'll find on the charter commission. He's done that in the past for other things. That's a good resource right there. Go to the senior center and schedule a meeting to talk to them and let them know what's coming up.
And I think, I agree with that. At the end of the day, there can be a great amount of information made available, right?
Yeah.
But you're still going to need the voters to want to
Yeah, right.
to reach out,
Right.
access it. Awareness that there is this process going on is a separate but still somewhat parallel issue.
Yes.
But there is, we can try to make the information as accessible as possible. And I think the end, one of the final discussions regarding that ultimately ends up being about when this gets voted on as well, which again is outside of our purview as a commission. The Board of Selectmen will determine that. But part of the communication that the first selectman left with us on the tables today, I had reached out asking about that part of the process, about the election. This is back Tuesday, October 10th. So I read through the Connecticut general statutes about when votes are held, and there's two options: a special election referendum or the next general. And there are rules for thresholds regarding the voter turnout if it is a special election. And that's what I believe the correspondence is here. And again, this is my first time seeing this part of the response. But it looks like we would need they would need 15% of the new voter registry as of January in order to validate any vote that was had for a special election.
And we get 15% to show up.
And so, if we have a 10,000 voter list, and we need 15%, we're going to get 1,500 people turning out, even if they all vote yes and it's less than that number.
Yeah.
You have an issue. So, there's definitely more discussions to be had, and at that point, that is a Board of Selectmen decision to be had based on the advice of their attorney. And it would appear that they're not so sure that you can just have it and not worry about the voter turnout.
Do you have any historical data that would state, under those circumstances, what percentages do turn out?
I don't know off the top of my head when the last time we had a special election in town. I know that for voter turnout for when we brought the budget vote to referendum has been fewer than 700 total voter turnout. I would say that. The closest thing I can think of is like a closed party primary for where general election information might be available. And those are probably roughly around the same numbers. So you'd be looking at probably what would amount to half of a municipal voter turnout if we were to hold this not during the next general election, which could be a tall task. And given the short time frame as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Considering that, would it be possible, I don't want to spend the extra money to a special election and then find out, we can't, is it possible that they put these questions forth on the
That I don't know.
ballot?
That I don't know.
No.
I don't think.
Matt, no.
No,
No,
no.
I didn't.
You'd have to start the process again.
We'd have to start.
Yes.
So we'd be
Yeah,
ready.
we discussed
We
that
had
last
that,
time.
yes.
Last meeting.
So, but again, I want to stress, that's a decision. We can deliberate it, we can make a recommendation in general. We can't determine as a commission that decision. Right? We can certainly speak to the board of selectmen as members of the commission, citizens of the town, and make our recommendations, both as members and as citizens, but that's not our decision to make.
Well, I know it's hard to have citizens understand the importance, because the only time you really need a revision is when you find out something's not working somewhere. And you don't find that out all at once. So people understand that, but I think we're kind of unique. There aren't a lot of people in town that really want to change or understand this. They don't need to. If they don't need to, why? Not everybody's going to find it at the same level of importance that we do, because we've seen where we need to change. So we got to get more people interested in that way, and that's what's hard, because you don't have a lot of voter interest or understanding of how important it is.
I'm hopeful that at least a couple of the questions, having made it to this process, is the result of a lot more voters taking notice
That's
on,
right.
on mistakes
That's
made in
right.
processes. And
All the
and
time,
whatnot.
sure.
A lot of voters are definitely if one budget passed, the other one doesn't have to be, and one doesn't. I mean,
They
a
can
lot of people
understand
have
that,
expressed
yes.
that one, that they want it
That's a
changed,
good
then we've got to get it out there. Say you want that changed, then show up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can we kind of pick, we know we're going to want the budget issue.
Yep, I think question one, circling this to the recommendations.
Yeah.
I question.
Yeah, I started to fill these circles out.
Question one, as worded, and again, this is a draft, but this is as the questions are worded on the sample ballot. Shall the operating budget, education budget, and capital plan be 3 separate items to vote and approve? And once approved, the specific item will not be voted upon again. I believe, short of the understanding that capital plan is going to be verbiage that changes pending another question, but currently that's how it is referenced. I think that that's a question that has driven this whole commission being formed in the first
Right.
place,
Right. I agree with that.
to clarify that. And it's one that has been voted on previously and was passed resounding. So I don't believe that that's a question that is going to be rejected, and I think there's a lot of sentiment out there in support.
I think that we're doing votes to get that passed, to get that budget issue straightened out,
Yeah.
so.
And the other one is, a lot of them are having problems paying their taxes, and they wanted it done quarterly. That would be a big boost for many of the families. And that's another one that's important, that they realize it's on that ballot.
Question 11, as worded on here. So this is one that did not originate from the Board of Selectmen suggestions, but that was brought up
Right.
through public comment. I'm in agreement. I think that's a good question. Having spoken to the tax collector as well, I wasn't aware that this is something she has brought up to every new incoming administration. Which, I mean, if we were just looking at her time there, I mean, she's spoken to at least 3. And so here we are. This is the avenue to make that change. She said she gets a lot of feedback at her office asking about that type of
You said
program.
Diane? Karen?
Karen.
Yes, Karen.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I would assume if we vote that in March, the next year that it starts would be July.
So that would be, and that's the question I had in mind about effective date. So hypothetically, if this was to go to a special election, right, that would be prior to the next fiscal year. So we would be voting on
Right.
it within this year.
So-
If it was to go to a general, then you would be voting on that in the
Right,
next fiscal
right,
year for
right.
its effectiveness.
But if we're having that in March, then it falls in line to start it
So-
up July 1st. And I'm wondering if that would be part of that question, starting July 20,
Right, it might fall all the way to 26
Yeah.
at that point,
Yeah.
based on when that election would be held, or when the questions would be brought to the public. There's a couple of other ones on here, I think that the scale of the change is relatively minor. So I would bring your attention to question 8, which is the Agriculture Commission and Conservation Commission being added to Chapter 7.
right.
I believe that that's probably something that's past due.
And housing, too.
So housing,
Yeah.
housing I did see listed, I know.
Oh, it was,
he-
yes, it's listed
Yeah.
in the charter.
It's listed in the charter.
Yes.
I think there might have been just a misunderstanding about
That's right,
having
you're
to
right
add
about
it. It is in
that,
the charter,
yes.
so that question would be edited as shown.
Once we get them in the charter, the next group can turn around and explain what their job is maybe, so that people know exactly
Well,
what
and
they're.
I know in the red line version, it does speak to just having the members appointed with the
Right,
number of them and
right.
such. But I think for the time being, adding them in is, it almost feels more as a house cleaning or housekeeping
Right,
uh,
right.
task.
Number 3, I think that's important, because now we have a 7th member being picked,
Yeah.
and how it should be clarified, I think.
Has anybody
Because
had
of
a
the time
chance?
frames.
Has anybody had a chance to review specifically the wording on that question in the red line? Okay.
Section
Yeah.
I'm not asking you to read through it thoroughly at the moment, but my first couple of passes on it, it basically lays out that there's going to be a staggered election approach
Right.
to it. Some years we'll have 2 members that are being voted on and seated, and one other year there's going to be 3
So that they're
vacancies.
always rotating.
And it's on a
Yeah,
rotating
right.
basis.
Starting
Yep.
in
Right.
2023.
Correct. Well, I'll go in order here. Question 4, shall section 2-5-5 be changed to increase from 10 to 30 days for printed circulation of new or modified ordinances? I hadn't really given too much thought to this particular issue of late. Maybe it's through my youth and the fall of newspapers that I've seen happen rather quickly. But I think that would be a good question to put forward as
Yeah.
well. I feel like I'll speak for just myself, I have a good understanding of what is being asked here. As far as the frequency of publications locally, Turnpike Buyer is weekly. I couldn't tell you how, on average, whether there's any newspapers that are doing 7 days a week locally.
Everybody's doing newspapers online. That's the problem. Nobody's getting the regular newspapers.
So long as Connecticut general statutes are still compelling towns to use print media for distribution and posting of notices.
Yeah, we can't, is there a statute about printed matter? Or we can give
There
it
is a-
completely, no?
But
I'm just kidding,
Everything
change the
works.
charter,
It's-
it's all
it's-
electronic.
I have seen the list of, the table that lists the frequency and postings and where for different town events based on whether it's a town meeting style of government, what kind of changes are being undertaken and that such. So publication is typically the word used in my brief knowledge, but I wouldn't take that to a lawyer's
Publication,
office
yeah.
for my understanding. But that's a question I believe is probably well suited to bring forward as well. Just 10 days, given the turnaround time.
Right. Yeah,
I think
agree.
30 days would be a slightly more accommodating given the print schedule of local publications.
I mean, we could go back to the old printed flyers and just throw them down from an airplane or something.
Yeah.
Skywriters. And please stop me as I'm listening if you have a comment or additional points to raise. I'm just running through them here. Just circle back to question 2 here. Been a fair amount of discussion about that at the previous meetings with public comment. I think that it's important that we clarify exactly what's being referred to
We
here.
have to have consistency of
There
language.
needs to be consistency of language. I think the way that the charter is written currently doesn't make it as clear as it could be. And the reference point as capital improvement program, I think would be a better descriptor and certainly a more consistent one as to what that 5-year capital plan, terms we use interchangeably, referring to the same thing.
Okay, so should we change the very first one and get rid of plan and put in program so people aren't confused by, is this a different?
And this is one of my broader discussion points that we need to look at. Currently, when you're putting the questions forward, the questions need to be written in accordance to how it is currently in the charter.
Okay, got it.
Right?
Okay.
And so when we're looking at red line edits, you'll notice some of the edits have shades of red and then other colors highlighted within them. Some of these changes, if one question were to go through and another question rejected, that would potentially change the nature of the edit. So that's why I stress that the significance of understanding it's a draft. And we can get pretty far along in understanding what the change would look like, but that some questions may not pass, others will or won't. And that may change how the charter looks like. So we may need multiple versions of a red line edit to see what each scenario might present to make sure that there's no additional confusion that gets introduced into this.
Can I just ask a question about that now, though, is, I mean, I've never heard a capital improvement plan called a capital improvement program.
Program, I haven't either.
I'm wondering if, because 5-year plan, capital improvement plan, I think plan might be a better word
I agree.
as opposed to program, because it's not really a program,
Right.
it's a
Not
plan
really a
She's
program.
right.
for future expenditure or future vision, you know.
It's a plan for the future.
And now this is in green letter.
In the red line edit, the green, I think, was made to replace and show where the previous language may have existed,
Okay.
and/or where he's inserting it as a example of where it would then be visible.
All right, I'm just curious why.
It was rather colorful.
And the original is,
In the original,
capital
remember we spoke to
program.
this as the last one, we saw 3 different reference terms within the same
Oh, it says
section.
capital program, not capital improvement.
This one has capital improvement. Oh, the one we have.
Yeah, when
Oh,
you read
yeah,
down,
okay, yeah.
they changed the capital program, they shortened it. They took the improvement part out.
Right, capital improvement program becomes capital program.
So what he do with the green letter is put capital improvement, and improvement was inserted.
It's not a program. A program is different from a plan.
Yeah, I think so too, those two
Yeah.
words are,
And
so that's not wording.
Good call.
Program is more
it's
defined.
a set program, whereas a plan is a plan that you plan to initiate or to do.
Yeah, it's future.
You're planning it for the future, but it's not a program.
Concerned with that.
I do too,
So,
yeah.
to get that clarified.
Question 5, shall all budget votes go to referendum for approval?
That's,
I feel like that's fairly straightforward.
yeah.
I think that's, again, one of the questions that is going to get a lot of voter interest, and there is a lot of voter support based on my interaction with the public on this question and from previous experience at our town budget votes. It's something that I always hear mentioned every time, especially when we start to get a line out the door. And then the only follow-up question on this would be, for all budget votes, is to make sure that when we're referring to all budget votes, what does the budget vote consist of?
That was my first question,
And that's-
because there can be budgetary votes that happen throughout the year that are not, you're not voting on an annual budget, you're voting on a budgetary item.
Right.
So
So
creation-
the question could be,
Clarify that.
the question may be rephrased as, shall the annual budget vote, or the annual town budget be sent to referendum?
Right.
Or
Right.
is something like that.
Always
It's a more
voted
clear
on by
question.
referendum.
Yep.
Annual budget.
Because in our existing charter, and this is to include part of that capital plan discussion, we've had a previous charter that revision where it was affirmed through the election that this is something that would get voted on at the annual town budget vote. But do you define the annual town budget vote as being inclusive of that
Yeah.
capital plan? So there's details to work out there, and we're looking through the red line version. I believe it's been addressed to a certain degree, but again, have not had a thorough opportunity to review in depth. But the wording of the question, for sure, I think, can certainly be sharpened. Question 6, shall section 5-6 and 8-3 of the town charter be modified to give definitions of WPCA as stated in Connecticut General Statute 7-2461?
I think you need to say what that is, because 3/4 of the people in this town do not know that that's Water Pollution Control Authority.
No use of acronyms in the questions.
So I think that should be spelled out so they know what they're voting on. Yeah.
Apart from the use of the acronyms, I feel like that might not be the question that gets everybody out to vote.
No, I'm sure.
I don't have an issue with the change as presented, defining it in there, we just have that as a commission, so. And then for question 7, shall there be a new section 5-7, pension board with definition? So on that one, red line added in, pension board. And as the edit reads, the Board of Selectmen is the Water Pollution Control Authority. I apologize. 5-7 would add pension board with the definition. That was for the, it looks like the new description would be for the pension board. And I believe this would also require an ordinance being passed. But I would have to get additional clarification on that. Any thoughts on that question? We covered question 8. Question 9, shall the Civil Preparedness Advisory Council be removed from the town charter? This question comes to us a little late in the process. First mention of this was at the public hearing a couple of weeks ago, based on a previous conversation with Kevin, our first selectman. I don't believe that he's received a whole bunch of feedback from the people he's reaching out to get more information on this. I'm willing to see what additional information can be provided. But as far as striking it, I'm not so sure that it is either necessary or advisable given when it's being introduced to the commission. But by all means, other people's take it.
This isn't just an advisory council. I mean, there is an existence. There is a, yeah, it is, but
I think he's trying to revise it. Before, it used to be a fireman from each of the chiefs from each of the departments.
and they had to, and
I
we don't
sat
have
on,
it, we have a preparedness.
I sat on that, I wouldn't even call it board, but it was as part of the school system. It was part of the safety, we called it our safety team, but we met with fire marshal, all the area fire chiefs, the police chief, the first selectman, the superintendent of schools, and it was all about developing plans for emergencies and, what kind of facilities do we have, what can we use for housing, what can we use for, and, it was all about that. I mean, and I don't know if that's
We have something.
what they're referring to here.
Right? I mean, he's got something, he's got a
Something.
So it's already there.
emergency.
Something's already there for emergencies.
If there's infrastructure that is duplicating this function and currently.
You'd have to talk to Kevin about it, because he did say, he talked out some firefighters and they're not interested in sitting on a board like that, and I guess the fire marshal, Kevin, there are people that do this on a regular basis. You'd have to talk to him about it.
Right.
But the other thing about that, I just wrote it down, civil preparedness does not have an ordinance. So that would be another one we would have to establish by
Well,
ordinance,
for,
so.
the question would be to remove from the town.
Right, I understand that, but I'm saying if it stands, then,
It would
yes,
be an
that
ordinance.
we have to, yeah.
Yeah, he has it redlined as an appointed board. That paperwork he handed out.
I don't have that.
Any other thoughts on?
To be honest, with things going on in this world, I don't know why we don't have somebody
Well, this is
meeting
an
on a
advisory.
regular basis with regard to our schools, with regard to, you know, here comes hurricane season. Is anybody interested in, I mean, where do we all go if something comes through? Do we use the town hall? I mean, they open it up for people who have, you know, been evacuated or whatever.
There
but-
is,
Crisis shelters, I
there is a plan.
Yeah.
There is a plan that
Yes.
was, or at least there was a plan when it's been a few years since I retired, but there was a town-wide plan for, you know, if this building needed to be evacuated, where would those children go? And then is there another facility in the town that can be used? Like, I know town hall is one of the other facilities that schools would use. But things like that, there is a plan for all that.
Yeah,
And I mean,
when they
schools
had-
have to have that plan by
Yeah, I would
by
think.
law.
There was
Right.
a hurricane
I-
that was coming through, it never really did, but they had it all set up at the Central Village Firehouse. It was an emergency plan.
Did-
I believe it was
Center.
This-
Hurricane Irene came through in the high school.
No, it was after that.
Oh, that was earlier.
Isaiah's. The Central Village Fire Company houses where the library was, the Emergency Operations Center,
Right.
which Dino takes charge of.
Okay.
And they do have, I went to the first responders breakfast last month, and they, like you said, they do have a plan how to evacuate kids, how to shut down schools, that's why you as a board would have to talk to Kevin when he comes to the next meeting and go over, he'll tell you who meets. I just don't know,
I think the.
but they meet on a regular basis
Questions
and
being
go
asked
over
for
these
question
things.
9 really would be, you know, it needs to be more substantial than a lack of contemporary interest in serving in it, I believe. You know, if the functions are being duplicated somewhere more effectively, I think that's a reasonable approach. And if this is just something that hasn't been fully utilized, and there is, you know, there's just no role for it in the town charter, given what infrastructure exists external to the town as well. That's the kind of information I would be reaching out to.
And I think
find.
too that if this team that I was on, I can't remember the name of it, but if it has another name, if we just word the question, you know, change the name to, you know,
Right, safety, whatever it is, safety
Yeah.
committee or, yeah.
if that's what we're calling it, then.
Certainly follow up on that point.
Yeah.
Question 10, shall section 7-5C be modified to include any and all political parties and non-affiliated residents if none, after 30 days of a vacancy? So the question is worded on the sample here is somewhat clunky.
Yeah.
But the change, as I read through here, would mean that after 30 days of a vacancy where a member of the resigned individual political party does not come forward to be appointed, the position would be opened up to anybody, regardless of what the previous affiliation was, provided that the minority representation for the commission is not violated. So
Can you just reword the question the way you?
Yeah,
I think it could be-
reword
Much
it,
more
yeah.
sense.
if that can fit in a little box, perhaps.
Yes.
But I think,
But I think that's
And again,
exactly what we were going for.
yeah, these questions are drafted, and that's why we have them here, is to poke holes and say how we would prefer to see these worded for recommendation. Any thoughts on question 10? We spoke to the tax due dates, and the one additional bit of information, if I can find it in my CV, would just be my email correspondence with the tax collector as well. Cheryl, I think it pretty much duplicated your conversation with her, where it just laid out the one-time cost and the annual cost going forward for compliance with such a measure. But she seems to be in full support of it. it would be a good question to put
I
forward.
think it
I think it'd be good.
I can provide that information.
You have that quantified, and what percentage of the population is asking for this?
I do not know what percentage of the population is asking, but we do know what the costs for adjusting the systems would be.
So everybody would get 4 per year, or is this a?
One bill would go out, one bill would go out, like it does now. They sent 2 in there, one for July and one for January. They would have 4 in there for the 4, July, October, April, January and April. So she wouldn't be remailing it, they would get it on the one shot when it goes out in July.
Tells
Right.
you your
Right.
second half is due.
Right.
You just
Have
say
the
the quarters.
same,
Right.
more options, but you could pay it all at once.
Right, absolutely, that's exactly what she said, yeah.
Would it make it easier for their office to run? Did she say that, Karen?
She did not speak to the, I guess, how easy it might be.
Well, I know
but the-
that they're really slammed.
Right, so I think it might
Yeah,
ease.
she was in agreement with it, she
Yeah.
liked the idea.
In
so-
my conversation with her, she spoke to, it would be the additional cost of just posting the quarterly due dates in publication, would be one increase less, we would be posting it two additional times. And then there would be a one-time software change.
Update.
or update
Oh, that's right.
yours
Yeah, the one
To
thing.
take into account probably the billing management and such. The one other financial element of it, I guess, that we could speak to is just the chance that overdue payments collecting interest on the end of the bill payer, those would potentially go down because we have a smaller principal that becomes overdue should someone not be paying their taxes. So that is a potential impact, given what the percentage is, and that you would be reducing the principal over time. I hate to say it would be negligible impact, but it wouldn't be one that would cause a revenue crisis
Right.
to the tax office. And then the last question I would add on here, he did not word, but that I did notice he had missing from the original board of selectmen suggestions was the town clerk and tax collector term being set to begin in January following an election. So
Was
that
that
was,
for tax collector as well?
yes.
And then town hall clerk?
Those changes, as I believe you noted, those changes are in the red line draft. Any additional discussion points about the Board of Selectmen materials that were sent over? So tonight, I'm not looking to ask for any action. Obviously, we're still looking at both the wording of the questions, and we are still looking at the draft red line
Right.
of what the change would look like. So we're not looking to add anything to the draft report at this time. But again, I would urge anyone with questions and upon your review, just pointers, information, to reach out to the First Selectman's office, reach out to myself. Just make sure that you are not sending emails to the group at large and replying, as that is not allowed under FOIA guidelines. So moving on to other suggested charter revisions. The first one that I had noted, looking back at some of the suggestions that have come in, that have been made, this one originated on the Board of Selectmen suggestions, and I haven't seen it spoken to very much since, and it was approaching the legislative body wording that exists in the charter on 2-1, right at the beginning of our town charter. This was brought up at the previous public hearing, and I believe that some clarity is being sought. I think originally the First Selectman had presented it as a question that needed some additional clarification in the charter. There was a couple of comments made at the previous public hearing that spoke to some clarity potentially being needed. And the more I read into it, the section still remains. I'll just read it aloud. Pretty brief, section 2-1, composition, page 1 of your town charter. The legislative powers of the town shall be vested in the town meeting, except as otherwise provided in this chapter. Now, if you read through the rest of that chapter, there are no other mentions of where that might not apply. So I believe the wording in the sense of semantics could probably be cleaned up. Now, I did look back to the Connecticut General Statutes on this. It's section 7-193, which sets up how your municipality is going to be established and the types and styles of municipal governance we have. And of course, we're in the clear for having a town meeting style of government. The legislative body can be defined as your town meeting. It can also have a combination of first elected. Somebody needs to be named or designated as the executive administrator in the town. And under the first selectman section in our town charter, we do have the first selectman identified as the chief executive. I believe that section 2-1A, that first section, can still be cleaned up a little bit to make a little bit more sense of this.
I did some homework on that piece, and I went and looked through under consulting town charters. They have them all nicely laid out for you on their website. You can pick out and look for parts that said legislative body or powers. And I just printed examples, and I'm willing, want to share them with the commission. They all pretty much say the same thing. They all probably have the same lawyer that wrote them all up for them. So if you want to share them and look at them, I feel like ours is pretty much similar to what the ones on the front here, on the first part, Canton, Coventry, and Cromwell, theirs are more lengthy in description.
They say mostly the same thing.
Yeah, the only ones I could find, there was Old Saybrook, but they have / Board of Selectmen as here and after sets forth in the charter. Except as otherwise provided in this charter with respect to the Board of Selectmen, the legislative body of the town shall be the town meeting as heretofore constituted with all, that's what made me know that the lawyer wrote this heretofore, at least says that. But anyway, constituted with all powers conferred by the Connecticut General Statutes and this charter. So, I don't know how much, I don't know what we're looking for in changing the wording in our charter for that. I think the power of the Board of Selectmen is pretty clearly stated in our charter. And I don't want to see us lose any piece of our town meeting being the legislative body of this town.
Correct. And I don't believe the suggestion was to change that per se, so much as it was to clarify if needed.
Okay.
And I agree. I believe that the charter is pretty clear on the executive power of the first selectman.
Yep.
Board of Selectmen. That first section, legislative powers, that's the first part that I feel there's a lot of credence to the argument, whereas the state statute repeatedly refers to it as legislative body. I feel legislative powers seems like a bit of a deviation from that language, and I'm not crazy about the implied otherwise provided in the chapter, which doesn't exist.
So that
Makes me feel like
Well,
something's
and that's
missing.
where I thought, because really, I think the clarification that was being asked for was the difference between Board of Selectmen versus, town meeting. And that's where I feel like the Madison example that I found clarifies it.
I like how that is worded.
Yeah. The legislative body of the town shall be the town meeting, blah, blah, blah. But then it says, except as otherwise provided in this charter, not this chapter,
Right.
with there are certain instances where the board of selectmen have that power.
I almost wonder if the use of the word chapter at the end of the
Yes.
section should not have just been
Should.
charter.
Maybe
That was
it
not a
was,
simple
maybe it was a
mistake.
typo.
I almost wonder, because it does align
Yeah.
much more closer
Yeah.
with the other examples that you provided
Yeah.
here, and in my own reading as well. But that being my 2 cents. That's the reading that I've done into there. There was one other bit of reading that I did just regarding if you were to move, so your legislative bodies, the town meeting, moving all budget votes, town budget votes to referendum, whether or not that would present any risk of violating how your own town governance is meant to be, and whether or not there's a requirement to have at least one annual town meeting as a town meeting legislative body.
In reading the charter and in my understanding of what a town meeting form of government is, yes, I believe that we would still have to keep the wording in the charter that
Yes.
talks about having, because I think I would think it would be important, not that it's a budget vote, but a budget presentation, and the annual meeting to talk about the budget, but also to talk about like the state of the union.
We can still have an annual town meeting,
Right,
which is
Yes.
supposed to entail a report from the Board of Finance that
Right,
backs up
yes.
the auditor's report of the
Right.
previous fiscal year,
Yes.
if complete, even if it's not complete.
Right.
To still have presentations from other boards and commissions in the town to summarize those activities. So that being my 2 cents on that suggestion, I feel like I think there's some good reasons to look at the wording of it for clarity's sake. If it came down to a question of how much space do we have on a ballot to squeeze all the questions in, I'd leave that to the commission to determine, what your rank and priority is if one had to be left off. Any other thoughts on the legislative body definition? Thank you, Bob. Other suggestions that were brought forward that I would be interested in hearing additional thoughts from the commission. To circle back to one of the material that Kevin provided on that initial packet with the email correspondence about citing Connecticut general statutes where applicable. It does not seem to be something that off the cuff is a very common occurrence across multiple town charters.
in my research.
And in your research as well?
There were several that had footnoted,
Footnote citations?
like not for every single piece of the charter, but things that maybe, like there was one for Board of Police Commissioners, and all it did was cite the statute that designates the powers of the police commissioner. But they certainly did not cite every statute that applied to every section of their charter. I think that would be, maybe a note page in the back of our charter that just said, here's the website, that we're listing, Connecticut general statutes.
And
I
that
think
could be,
they're easy enough to find.
that could
They
be
are,
something
they-
the town
they have it
clerk's
very well
office
laid out.
provided
Yes.
too.
Yeah.
So I would put that under the category, is that a question for the charter revision? Or is this more of an informational type request that can be or is currently handled through other venues?
Town attorney didn't like that idea at all.
It seemed like one of the big concerns was going to be the cost initially, based on correspondence from the first selectman. And I don't believe the attorney ever fully answered what the cost, the quote would be for something like that. It doesn't look like they have a good template of examples of previous work.
I think it could be rather confusing as well.
Yeah, that's one of his comments.
In my limited knowledge of charters, I have vast knowledge, but what I've seen is that you have a bit of latitude. Each town has latitude in how they implement some of those
Right.
statutes based on the charter.
Right.
So if you're citing statute and it doesn't line up with, your town has not taken that pathway to implement this, but this pathway,
May open up another can of worms.
but it would provide confusion as to what
Correct.
the charter actually says. I mean, I think having a resource maybe is a good idea, but citing every statute, I think would be, in my opinion, would be confusing.
Overkill.
You might as well not have a charter form of government. You can-
Yeah,
That's the other choice, you just follow the
just
Connecticut
follow
general
state
statute.
statutes. Yeah.
And you don't have your own charter. Some towns do.
And I believe, just to supplement, I believe his initial suggestions were more about citing statute when applicable.
Right.
Rather than just lifting verbiage from the general statute,
Yeah.
just a footnote saying, we have it set up this way because
This.
one
these-
denoted as, Connecticut general statute, 9,
Yeah.
so and so. Okay. Any other thoughts on that suggestion?
The other thing about citing something like that is that you then have to update it as ordinances or as statutes are changed. You would, you'd have
And
to
they
make
change a
sure,
lot, yeah. Change a lot.
yeah, and that would have to be switched out to do that.
Not digital yet.
Yeah.
What's that, Dan? What did you say?
It's just like Colleen saying that we would be able to stay in sync with it with somebody's job to make sure that that's still,
Be an ongoing change.
the new digital push that everybody is seeing us go to right next 10, 15 years. I can see that then being applicable potentially, right, where you're tied to electronic documents and then you get that real time, red flag that pops up and says the statute has changed. What we've been working we're not there yet. So I like that, keeping it separate, just to see, we're not having to keep gaps.
Any other discussion on that suggestion? Moving on to two additional discussions or suggestions. Excuse me. Was should the charter make mention of roles and responsibilities of the boards and commissions? I believe previous feedback on this has been that we would be adding much of what material already exists for some boards to the town charter at that point. It might become quite a large document, but also that the boards and commissions through their respective websites or whatever venues are housing things like bylaws and descriptions would be duplicating the work that already exists out there. I believe Kevin also spoke to it in the previous public hearing. It might have been a separate meeting prior to that some confusion can be created as well when you start adding bylaws to a town charter document for matters of compliance, either following state statute or how those bylaws then get edited or changed. But for specifically roles and responsibilities, I think the thought process was that that was something that could be truncated to a concise definition, maybe one or two sentences. I'm not sure what everybody's thoughts on that.